this is an all-aboard Florida item, and the reason why it basically is an emergency item is because the information that we're getting has been recent. The item is somewhat based on a conversation that I had with Mr. Rusty Roberts of All Aboard Florida last April 10th. And we just took it up at the Board of County Commissioners meeting, the next meeting, which was last Tuesday. And it's basically the wish of the Board of County Commissioners that we rescind the last memo of the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council because we believe we need a more focused approach. And another part of the reason why it's an emergency is because the first item deals with the extension of the FRA from, comment period from 45 to 90 days. And we don't know when that begins. We've heard that it may begin as early as the beginning of May. And so our next meeting might be after the beginning of the start. So that goes to the emergency aspect of it. But what the Board of County Commissioners would like to do is to focus and see if the whole Treasure Coast group would like to focus more on asking the governor and every municipality and county to make the request that the comment period for the draft EIS be extended from the 45 to 90 days. Many of us have already done that, but again, we want to get everybody on board and get the governor's support for it. Support the type of information request that is in the backup that I presented to All Aboard Florida in a letter dated April 10, 2014 to Mr. Rusty Roberts. This is with a focus on getting the information necessary to make a reasoned and rational decision about the All Aboard Florida passenger rail project and its impact on our communities. I would like to make sure that everybody understands that the April 10th letter is in no way comprehensive and represents no more than an attempt to hopefully begin a fruitful dialogue with All Aboard Florida. And I'll note that in the April 10th conversation with Mr. Roberts and a political consultant by the name of Mr. Matt Mueller, they basically didn't have many answers. And it's quite clear that they know very little about the financing of it. So it's my suggestion as we go forward that we spend more time with people who can answer the questions, which to me would be the CFO and CEOs of All Aboard Florida Operations LLC and Fortress Investment Group. The third item is to ask if the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council staff can investigate the federal regulations for sealed corridors for high-speed rail. That's my understanding, and no more than that FDOT has never adopted regulations for speeds above 79 miles an hour. It is also my understanding that the federal government, the FRA, has developed sealed corridor regulations for high-speed rail. It may be appropriate to ask FDOT, both directly and through the governor's office, to adopt the federal high-speed regulations for Florida rail systems because of the significant public safety concerns of the high-speed rail. I will also note that at the bus tour yesterday, I was on it for the Indian River County portion. I had a conversation with a man from FDOT who I believe his name was Fred Wise. It was a moving bus conversation, so I'm not sure I got everything accurate, but what I took away from it is that FDOT's aware of the sealed corridor. FDOT understands the investigators' report for some of the southern portion, and no more than the feeling I got from FDOT was that it was his expectation that at the end of the day, All Aboard Florida would be responsible for putting in the sealed corridors. And they do have the federal regulations on sealed corridors. The comment he made, one comment he made was that there are a couple high-speed trains that haven't had to put in sealed corridors, but they were started before the federal regulations were in place. So that I would like to offer, or would like to get the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council support for that, and I'll offer that in the form of a motion.
Sorry, this item is not on the agenda to be voted on. That's my understanding of the motion made by council.
I am confused because I didn't see the item on public speaking on the agenda either, and I thought that I'd asked this to be put on as an emergency item.
Let me ask the council to consider his request. It's okay. So we can have a conversation about Commissioner Solari's request. And I think that's fair. And he's asked for three things. Commissioner Solari, you'll have to help me with the three things.
Yeah, basically, it's to ask to rescind the previous Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council so we can focus on these three things. The first is to ask the governor and I hope everybody from every county municipality will join in, to have the FRA comment period for the draft EIS extended from 45 to 90 days. To have this group support the type of information request that I made in the April 10th, 2014 letter to Mr. Rusty Roberts of All Florida, to try to get the dialogue going and try to get the information that I believe that we as elected officials need to get before we can actually make a decision on this, and to get the type of information that I believe the public wants to know.
And that is on page 37.
Which deals basically with 3 items, some engineering items, some corporate structure items, and some financial items. And the 3rd item is to ask if we can get the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council staff to look at the idea of sealed corridors, federal regulations regarding sealed corridors, and if it would be appropriate to get FDOT to adopt them, so the result being that all of North Florida would be responsible for putting in place sealed corridors, which would then make the idea of quiet zones for localities moot.
Commissioner, I have a question. I think there's probably general agreement that extending the comment period is a good thing. Give everybody more time than 90 days. It's a good thing. We certainly have the authority underneath it to do that. I'm not sure I understand why it's important to rescind the Treasure Coast letter. It's really kind of asking questions. It's a kind of, we'll have another opportunity to engage and continue this. So why is it so important to rescind that letter?
It's not much, I never said it was so important, but my belief is, given the time frame, it was best to focus on these items rather than on a dozen different points. So that's the reason.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes, sir. As Chair has mentioned, it probably would be more effective for us to act as an authority existing. Now we're looking at how, because we've learned more things, so we might want to redraft another. I think that would be appropriate rather than trying to erase the past. We address the immediacy of what we've learned. So that's what we want. That's the nature. That's the nature.
Sorry. Can I ask a question?
Commissioner Boucher.
Yeah, I'd really like to see with a lot more specificity what's in the letter that Commissioner Solari sent to this Roberts guy. Can we talk that rather than just talk generally about some engineering things, some financial things? Could we just have the
Council would like the letter to start on page 37 of the communication package.
And I can go over it briefly if you want to. I mean, one of the biggest problems of this is the corporate structure of all aboard Florida. There's never
Why is that a problem?
It's a problem because there's a lot of talk, at least in my community, that the purpose of this is not really a passenger rail train. The purpose of this is to maximize the wealth of the Fortress Investment Group. Fortress apparently has somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 different companies involved in moving the freight from the Far East, especially China, through the new wider Panama Canal, to the ports of Miami and Fort Lauderdale, to rail system owned by other Fortress companies, managed by the logistics companies owned by Fortress, where this whole process will add to the wealth of companies that own real estate in Miami and Fort Lauderdale. And they can't understand why all this is being done through a small passenger rail train, especially when there's been no successful passenger rail train in America in years. And the feeling is that this is actually a smokescreen to get federal money to double track the line along the east coast of Florida for the benefit of freight, with the knowledge that most probably, or there's a high degree of probability, that the passenger rail system will fail soon after. And I understand Fortress Investments Group desire to maximize shareholder wealth. That's their job. So there's still their desires to maximize shareholder wealth. They do have shareholders, sir. As a matter of fact, we had a couple of shareholders of Fortress talk at the last Florida County Commissioner meeting. So, and that's what private equity firms generally do. That's certainly been what I've been reading about in the Wall Street Journal for years and years. The idea of private equity firms taking one or more companies, maximizing their structure to build wealth, and then selling those companies off. And that is what a lot of people in Indian River County expect what's going to happen. With the absence of any financial information about all aboard Florida, a reasonable speculation is that the Fortress Investment Group will load up the debt onto all aboard Florida, meanwhile maximizing the wealth of a dozen other Fortress companies so that they'll basically be indifferent if all aboard Florida fails. And there, in addition to the corporate structure questions, there are a lot of basic financial questions in there, so we can get some sort of sense of how this rail project will impact those other companies so that we can get an understanding of whether this project is actually meant to be in some way beneficial to our communities or simply maximize the shareholder wealth of the Fortress Investment Group.
Commissioner, I think, to me, this is the first step is a process question. These are legitimate questions that they need to be asked and need to be under the right venue with the right people at the right level within the organizations. I think there's potential for some consensus here. I think most would agree that we can collectively work to request a 45-day extension on the comment period to give us 90 days to respond to the CIS. It would not be my sense, and maybe Kim, you can help us, that this is going to come out on May 1st. Do you have a sense when the draft EIS will be published?
For the record, Kimberly, the council staff, FRA staff continues to suggest the March-April timeframe. So we're hoping by the end of April, we should see the EIS. We haven't had any indication that it would be beyond that time.
It's not going to be March.
No, it's not going to be March now, but that's the date they keep giving me. But March-April timeframe is the official timeframe.
So we would have 90 days perhaps from the May 1st, and it could be May 1st.
That's really our expectation.
So, but the consensus could be that we would have the staff put together something on behalf of the Treasure Coast, and each member organization would request the 90 days total comment period. I think we could also ask the staff to investigate the sealed corridor issue and do some research on the regulations there. It seems like that would be something that we could agree to have the staff do. I'm not sure what the will of the council is regarding the rescinding the Treasure Coast previous comments. It's not my view that that would be necessary or even desirable. Any comments on that?
I'd be happy to support the first item is to ask the governor to extend the public comment period, and the third item, which is to do further work on the sealed corridors. The second item, I'm lost on, and the more you discussed it, the more lost I got. And that was the Rusty Roberts letter and the rescinding of our letter. So I'd be happy to support the first item and the third item.
Well, I'll amend the motion to take away the decision, but I'll keep it for the first, second, and third items. I personally believe that the second item is the crux of it. If we can't get the type of information...
I get it, but I just don't, the more that you're explaining it, the further and further lost.
You restate your motion.
Yes, that we get the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council support to ask the governor to request that the FRA comment period for the draft EIS be extended from 45 to 90 days. That we basically get the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council support to request the type of information in the April 10th, 2014 letter to Mr. Rusty Roberts of all of Port Florida to get the type of financial engineering, to begin the discussion on top of getting the type of financial engineering and corporate structure information that we need as elected officials to fulfill our fiduciary duty, and which I believe the public is interested in getting, and to ask the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council to investigate the federal regulations for sealed corridors for high-speed rail with the idea that it may be the case that we can get FDOT in Florida to adopt those federal regulations for sealed corridors, which would, in my understanding, make the quiet zone issue moot.
We have a motion, a revised motion. We have a second.
A second.
Have a second. Discussion?
Yes, please.
Commissioner Fuller.
And then the second point is we're talking, this is more generic. We're not saying we're going to go to that letter and we're going to ask anyone to request it, so we're going to ask questions of that nature to achieve financial information.
Basically, my understanding of Mr. Bush's putting the letter on the agenda is to try to give everybody a little more focus and use the benefit of somebody else's work to push this project forward. Any municipality or commission that wants to use a letter does not have to ask every single question. but it certainly makes things move a little faster for them, and it might trigger some other questions that they may want to ask. So it's basically to try to get all aboard for them to understand that this is the type of information that we, again, as elected officials need before we can make certain decisions. And again, that I believe the public has a right to know under the circumstances.
Councilwoman Heard?
My question is, really, as to number 2, what you're suggesting is their motive for why this corporate group would want to double rail what they have in single rail now. So I don't know that we could ever get to the motive. Does the feasibility plan show that ridership would be supported? Is that in our, do we already have that information saying that we do think it would be successful as a passenger rail?
Kim is shaking her head no back there.
Well, that to me would be the important thing, because I will never be able to get their motive. I mean, they could be all kinds of shadow companies I don't know, and I would be assuming a motive there. That if you could show me that there's something about what they're doing that shows that they have no reasonable expectation that this could succeed as a passenger rail, then I could be convinced of whatever motive you may have assigned. But I'm just not sure that we're going to be able to get to that motive by looking at the paperwork. So I would be interested in the feasibility of the passenger rail, but that's what this entire process is about, correct?
I'm concerned with their motive. But the public is very concerned with their motive. As an elected official, I can't tell them that they're right or wrong or that their motives are anyway relevant. But if I get the financial information, I can look at it and see if their 10-year pro forma makes any sense. So far, based on different Florida Trend articles, I've seen that their total revenue for the all-aboard Florida is supposed to be $143 million. I then, based on the conversation with Mr. Roberts, understand that their interest rate for the $1.6-something billion loan is about 5.75%, which would be about $80 million. That leaves them $63 million. A reasonable plan would suggest that they have to pay something, probably something significant for the easement to FEC Industries, Inc., which would maybe then leave $20-30 million. That's not enough to operate a rail system for 32 trains a day. So what the financial information tells you is that is there any reasonable chance of success that this might be successful? And that's the type of basic information that anybody dealing with anything like this, I think, would want to know.
I think,
my question was, could we ever get to the bottom of that? We're looking at the feasibility of it, and that's the entire, what this entire process is, looking at the feasibility of it. Explain this to me. That's my question.
And can I just say, a lot of this information is very proprietary, and we're not going to be able to get it. I mean, we don't have subpoena power, and, you know, we're asking a lot of questions that perhaps they don't have the duty to disclose, and they certainly probably don't have the will to disclose either.
I think Michael has indicated that we can ask a series of questions. We may or may not get answers to some of these, so we can certainly ask questions. It becomes part of the public record. And Councilmember,
I know they're not competing with anybody, but why would they show us their pro forma? I mean, you know, they're disclosing internal details that are for their own benefit, and they compete with Amtrak probably, and they compete. You know, they want to tell everybody what their costs are and what their revenue assumptions are. You know, it's their money that they're putting at risk. That loan is not a grant. It's not a grant. It has to be repaid. And you know, they're at risk. You know, if we're ascribing intent to them that they're just doing this as a ruse and they're going to lose money and can't possibly work, I'm not prepared to go that far.
Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Overbrook.
I'm sorry.
Wait,
First of all, going back to the three items that are part of your issue, I see no problem with extending the comment period, but I do have a problem with taking the elements of your letter and saying that is from this entire body when the items that we submitted previously are from this entire body, first of all, in that letter. Second, as we look at, we need to remember that this is a private business, and they have the rights to keep their records as they see fit. Additionally, you, as any member here, has the right in this extended 90-day period
to put our comments in and to have those questions answered. They don't necessarily have to come from this board. They can come from any individual here, and all of those have to be answered as part of the EIS. So all of that is also going to be public as you're moving forward. The elements of your letter can all be submitted as part of that public comment. The materials that we submitted as coming from this board can also be part of that public comment. I think that we're looking at some semantics here as well within your motion that, frankly, I can't support the use of the words in your motion. Now, again, extending the 90-day public period, the final part, if you want the staff here to look into the sealed corridors, I see no issue with that whatsoever, but the way that you worded your motion, it was more of a mandate, and also having those as part of the letter that you formulated, having that as part of our comment, and I can't support that portion of it. But there are certainly elements that you brought up that are very valid, and I see no reason why you, certainly as a public office holder, can't submit those comments as part of the EIS and during this extended period, and frankly should expect answers as a part of that.
Well, there are two things for that. Well, three things actually. Because Mr. Busher, time and time again, has said that we have often a more effective voice if we operate as a region. So that's the basis of my coming here today, so that we can get the strength from operating as a region. Second thing is, I'm not sure that the point of the EIS, which is called an environmental impact statement, is to look at the financials of a company. The third thing is, and I've agreed from the start, that it's a private company, and if they had continued to be a private company on private tracks as a private project, I wouldn't even be talking about it. But they clearly now want assistance on the federal level, the state level, and the local level, and that, for me, gives me a responsibility as an elected official to try to get some basic information to see if there's some possibility of success. A $1.6 billion loan from the federal government is a subsidy on one level, and certainly there's a responsibility for us to see if there's some chance of repayment. It's my understanding that the FRA often doesn't look at the financial aspect as hard as it perhaps ought to. I believe that this is, at the end of the day, taxpayer money, or possibly taxpayer money, for which we have an acute responsibility.
But again, Mr. Solari, you're continuing to use the words maybe, supposedly, it could be, and again, those are suppositions on your part, and they may be very well valid in the long run. But I can't feel comfortable going off of maybe and it might be in those types of situations. I agree with you that there should be some answers at some point, and that we need to put those as part of our public comment. But I cannot support a motion based on maybes and suppositions.
I did not think that the request for an RIF loan was a maybe.
We're gonna need to wrap up this discussion. We've got some of our speakers that have to catch a plane in a little bit. So we do have some folks that have asked to comment. Councilman?
Yes, I'd be very brief. First of all, I agree with the previous speaker that it relates to the council taking a position of one member if I personally have full understanding. Number two, of the financials. The request to understand that I think is important, but we live in a capitalistic society, and if someone is taking a loan out, they're going to be responsible for that loan. Could they default? Absolutely. But the people who review those documents, I think, have a responsibility to ensure that they are in a position to repay. Is that the Treasury Code Council? It may or may not be, but at the federal level, there are people responsible for that. So I don't want to get too far into determining, we have the right to question, but as a board, determining whether someone who's seeking a loan is going to repay. The last thing, I'm more important is how it impacts my residents. Are we going to be responsible for repayment of the loan? If not, I don't have a problem. Some would say since it's federal money, it falls back on us. To some degree it does, but as it relates to being responsible, whoever borrows it, it does. So I would like the discussion to be more focused on how this rail would benefit the residents in my community, how it would benefit our economy in a region should it be successful. And it is my hope that we don't adopt just one person's position, because some of us don't feel the same. And if we don't, I think that we need to articulate that. So I would hope that we focus more on the impact of the taxpayers and the benefit to our economy, as opposed to those concerns that may or may not be our responsibility to go back and get whatever may be due to our residents. Thank you.
Mayor Delon.
Super fine. On the content, I know we all have a lot of questions, and I don't disagree with any of Commissioner Solari's, the items he wants to ask, but the question is whether they're appropriate at this time and appropriate by this body. There certainly are a lot of other questions that we have, very specific questions, and I think that we need to schedule that, schedule this as an action item and discuss those if that's the desire of the council. So I don't support sending committee to those questions at this meeting. Secondly, it's procedural. This is listed. We did not take a vote to consider this under anything other than update. It's not. I know it's referred to as an emergency item, but it really is not as an update. And I think that under this also, this is not an opportunity for public comment either. Being used to how, government conducts business, it really is an update. And, whether or not we can vote on that, I would,
I think our council has given us advice that we can vote.
I'm just concerned that really there's a lot of comment on this, but it's not the time.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Mayor Ferrari, whoever put the sign up here, can you please remove it? We can't see the audience very well. We've got the sign up here. Thank you. Mayor Ferrari.
I was just going to say, this is an item that the council is going to vote on, and the public is entitled to comment before the vote.
Motion to open public comment? I made a motion to open public comment.
Oh, you did?
We can't have a motion, so we can't take public comment on something, but...
We've got a motion, I think. I think we had a motion in a second.
We're going to...
Well, we didn't have a second?
We're going to have to...
Comment, but before you vote on the motion, you've got a one public comment.
Yes. And we're going to table this because we're going to need to get item number 9. Our speaker has some tight deadlines, and so we're going to table this for the moment. We're going to go to item number 9. It's information.
We'll make a motion to table later in the agenda.
Motion is to table this to later in the agenda. Got a second? Second. Everybody all in favor? Aye.